Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Hello, Patrick Dunno here from the Irish Farmers Journal. This week, Deputy News Editor Katrina Murphy reports on the security risk posed by wireless cameras used on many farms. Some of them have been hacked and the live images from homes and yards are visible online. Katrina explains the issue to our news correspondent Odile Evans.
This is a great story, but it's an awful revelation, I think, for farmers, because we found that there are farms in Ireland where the farmer, I think, is unaware that their sheds, farmyards and possibly their homes are actually being live streamed on the internet worldwide. It's because that they have never changed their security password from the default, which maybe it could be simple as password, it could be 0000, but they've never changed it from the time they got their cameras installed, and as a result they've left themselves being open to being watched from anywhere in the world.
So what cameras are we talking about here? Is this cameras in calving sheds, or where would they be?
Yeah, so we've had a look at it ourselves, and there's a broad selection. There's a lot of cows in sheds, cows in cubicles, milking parlours. We can see suckler cows with a freshly calved, with her new calf beside her. We can see the loading, the cattle being fed. You name it, we can see it, including mass. There's altars of churches on this, front doors of houses in Balturba, County Mayo. It's really amazing, the stuff that's being amazingly scary, I think, what's being streamed.
And so, I mean, basically what you're saying is anybody can be watching this, and that obviously poses a security risk on farms.
Huge security risk. I mean, nobody wants to feel like they're being watched, but especially when you don't know. These things were set up to be a farm aid and a farm tool, but they could in fact be used for burglary, theft and maybe even more sinister things. Our IT expert in the Farmers Journal tells us that someone with a pretty basic IT knowledge can use these cameras, log into them, get the password for they already have the password for the security camera, but they can use it to work backwards into your own system. Our IT expert was able to actually move the camera in a farmer's yard down in the Midlands. And he said it's only very few steps to be able to get things like, to be able to zoom in on the car registration or the tractor registration, to be able to then find ownership details for that vehicle, the exact address of that vehicle. And he said another couple of steps would bring you to actually being able to log into the PC on the farm, which, as many farmers would be aware, could contain things like, invoices, receipts, photographs, tax documents, you name it. It's very scary.
Internet banking obviously comes in there as well, doesn't it?
Internet banking, there's very simple software that can be installed without the farmer knowing it, that you can actually be watched as you do your online banking, and there is the possibility of getting your online banking passwords.
So is this just an issue in Ireland?
No, this site is actually an international site, and it's got live streams from all kinds of places all over the world. So from business premises, kitchens, restaurants, to farms in Japan. There's a milking parlour in Japan, cubicle sheds in northern America, you name it. So
what can Irish farmers do to avoid this situation?
It's actually remarkably simple. The first thing, and probably one of the only things that will stop this, is to change their password from the default password that came when the camera was installed to something of their own choice, and just make sure that password is not the same password as their other passwords, say for email and those things. So it's a very simple step that will stop a lot of this. Obviously the footage being broadcast, but all of the other security implications as well.
So relatively simple cyber security essentially, yeah?
Exactly.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that. You can read more about this in Farmers Journal print edition or on farmersjournal.ie.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
We heard last week that Teagasc's outlook for beef prices next year is very negative. So what do the factories think? Odile Evans asked Paul Nolan, Group Development Manager at Dawn Meats.
It certainly will be challenging, I think, there's no doubt about that, but it's not a panic situation by any means. I think what we have to do is steady up and see how the Christmas trade plays out, and then once we go into January we're into a new situation. The probability is that Britain, who that has been very much involved in promoting the local product, hopefully will be back to buy some Irish beef again, more Irish beef again. given their supply situation. And Europe is looking reasonable at the moment in terms of a pick-up there. It'll all be about managing, I guess, the numbers that are in the system next year and the varying qualities that exist within that.
Yeah. So how big a concern is the quality of those numbers?
It's not really a concern per se. It's really the reality is that we know that with 100,000 extra animals in the system, most of them are coming through the dairy system. So it's likely, therefore, that a high percentage of those will not make the premium market. And it's all about then planning our strategy to make sure that we get the best possible return from them at the next level, wherever that happens to be, depending on the quality that comes in. But there are other factors. As I said earlier tonight, the kill is ahead as we go into December, so that is taking from some of that potential 100,000 extra next year. And also what we don't know is just how many of the animals that are in the system will be fed to finish in January, February, as distinct from being evened out over the rest of the year.
Okay. And you talked there in your presentation about the impact of Brexit and how you had to plan around it. Maybe you could just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I suppose basically what happened was when the British voted to come out, I think a lot of them woke up the next day thinking, gosh, what have we done? And then they felt under siege generally. And what happened was that retailers decided that what they would do was fly the flag, which you could understand, and promote all things British. So there's been a huge push on British beef under the Red Tractor brand, which has meant that there has been somewhat of a reduction in the volumes that would traditionally go from Ireland to Britain in the kind of October to December period. And that's something that we've had to manage. We knew that the numbers would continue to come to us for processing, and for all of the good in-spec cattle, I'm delighted to say that we did manage to find alternative homes. We redirected some of it into some of the premium markets in Europe. So basically that's been the effect of Brexit. After Christmas, the hope is that supplies will have tightened somewhat there, and that we'll be in a position to take up whatever shortcomings there.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
One of the big uncertainties for next year is what direction food prices will take in Britain, and how that will reflect on the products we export there. Colin McCarthy writes about it in this week's Irish Farmers Journal. At a recent discussion organised by Borbia for Irish food exporters in London, our agri-business editor Owen Lowry discussed this question with John Copestake, a food retail expert with the Economist Intelligence Unit.
Okay, so I think the first thing is that, specifically Irish agri-food companies, we're going to see food prices go up in the UK. I think that there will be an inflationary lag. It hasn't happened yet, but in a way, UK consumers have had it very good for very long because there's been a lot of discounting and a lot of low prices internationally. Now that we've had that forex hit with the euro being strong and sterling being weak, we're seeing food prices rise up and push up, and that's in line also with rising international commodity prices as well. So I think in the near term, certainly next year, we're going to see inflationary pressures, and that's going to erode on consumer expenditure. It's going to mean that consumers are probably a little bit more depressed about spending and are going to spend a bit less.
So we've seen then over the last number of years there's been big deflationary pressures on food. That's been driven by the retail market being very competitive in the UK. Is that going to be still the case? Are we still going to see huge competition between the retailers in the UK?
I think so. I think there's definitely going to be an element of that. Retailers have already set out a stall where they're trying desperately to absorb the costs themselves or force suppliers to absorb costs. But as we saw in the spat between Unilever and Tesco, actually some of the big brands are start putting their feet down and saying, no, actually you have to pass on some of these costs now. And I think that's what's going to happen next year. As I said, consumers have had it very good for very long. It's not just been because of price competition amongst retailers. We've seen really low commodity prices, big fall in oil prices, and those have really lowered inflation. But they're all on the way back up now. So in a way, there's several things combining which are going to push up prices.
So you're very confident that prices will move up. How long do you think that's going to realistically take to happen? Because we've seen in Ireland, particularly in the fruit and veg sector, mushroom sector, we've seen a lot of people go out of business, Irish business, because of the sterling piece particularly, and simply because the price of food hasn't risen by that 20% deflation piece that we've seen with the weakness in sterling. How long do you think that will take to change?
Well, there's always a lag period between, prices between a change in exchange rates and then prices going up or inflation coming through. Part of that will be down to hedging. A lot of Irish food firms will have hedged on their currency, and so they'll be able to maintain a price point which is lower. At some point, though, in the next few months, I imagine that we will start seeing inflation creep up, and then I think that from then it's probably going to keep creeping up throughout next year, and I think that's really going to erode on shopping baskets. People's discretionary income is going to shrink a little bit, and that's going to cause retail sales volumes certainly next year in the UK to decline.
Finally, do British people think that Brexit will happen, and how long will it take to have a full effect?
I think British people do think that Brexit will happen. I think they pretty much know it's going to happen now that we've talked about invoking Article 50 and we've had a referendum on it. I think how long it's going to take to enact is how long is a piece of string. It took Switzerland 20 years to negotiate their FTA. It took Canada 7 years to negotiate an FTA, which is much less complicated than we're extricating ourselves from right now. So I think we have a period where we're going to have 2 years of negotiations, but that will only probably put in place a transitionary period, and then it may go well beyond that.
Okay, thanks very much, John. Thank you.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
On Wednesday, the Irish Farmers Journal's dairy editor Jack Kennedy was at the National Dairy Conference in Mullingar. There he met Brian Gilsonan, a 23-year-old farmer from Virginia in County Cavan. Brian milks 140 cows in partnership with his parents. Jack asked him about the professional diploma in dairy management from which he has just graduated in Moore Park.
Jack, I was very happy I completed it. It was putting me in touch with very highly skilled farmers that I could relate to, and they showed me the whole business side of farming, and I'll have them there throughout my career. So it is for any questions I have along the way. So it was. The course went into great depth into dairy farming. A lot of people at agricultural college and they leave after 2 years. I don't think that's adequate for a dairy farmer. So it is into the future. They have to be so highly skilled and forward.
So what was involved in the course, in the professional farm manager's course, Brian? What was involved in it? Did you get work?
Yeah, it's basically the first year of it. I worked on a farm in Ireland, and then after every month park and do about a week session. So there's in touch with all the researchers in there and the latest research that was carried out. Then we had exams at the end of the first year, and we went on and went to Ireland, and some of us stayed in Ireland on farms in Ireland, and during New Zealand we worked with very large scale farms, and we did 6 months there, came home then and started another farm, and it was the same thing again. It was in Moore Park for a week every month, and so it was just building on the experience of first year and probably getting more of a managerial role, so it was working towards the end goal.
Good man. So, I mean, you saw a good bit on farm as well as kind of doing a bit of theory inside in the classrooms. One of the topics that you talked about in your presentation that you just finished is you bought heifer calves and you've leased them out to a farmer, to another dairy farmer. Yeah. Can you just give us a little bit of how that works, or why did you buy heifer calves?
So basically, when I started my professional farm manager's course, I decided I wanted to own my own cows, and it was in my short-term goals to own my own cows. For security reasons, I wanted to milk them. And I went down the road of purchasing them, and I reared the heifer calves. And I felt that by purchasing the heifer calves, I had them there if the opportunity came up down the road. The heifer calves were due to calve down the spring gone by. I leased them out on a 3-year lease, and the plan is when I leased them out, selling them was not an option to me because I had put such an effort into rearing them. So I leased them to a well-known farmer so that I know has very similar stock to myself, and I'll take them back hopefully and bring them to an opportunity that comes up.
Okay, nice one. And you know, in terms of rough figures then, what do you get as a return, like for your cows being on someone else's farm milking?
Basically I get 10% of the value every year. They keep the calves, and I'll take them back an equivalent animal with an increased EBI. So our herd EBI was increasing at €8 a year, and over the 3 years it'll be €24, so it was an increase.
Perfect. I mean, again, in your presentation you talked about your home farm in Virginia, County Cavan. Like, I mean, you have brothers and sisters. Maybe one day you will farm there, or will you go further afield?
One day I'll farm there. At the minute, I don't see myself going home there. My dad and mum is still relatively young, and they're still very keen to farm there. I seen more opportunity outside the farm gate. I want to sort of align myself in a business that was growing rapidly, and this opportunity came up. It's close by, so if it worked out, I could work it as a cistern farm to my home farm, if I would.
Okay. So I mean, that's the new opportunity you talk about. You're in as a farm manager on a new farm that's being developed. How many farm do you reckon in the coming years?
We plan to have down 260 cows next spring. I see that farm growing to a 400 cow farm pretty rapidly. There's great potential, and the farm is in the top 1% in the country. Very good free draining soil. The herd of cows that's on it is number 54 on the EBI list. And I feel I have the knowledge to grow it.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Meanwhile, I attended the 50th anniversary of the 1966 March for Farmers' Rights in Dublin, and I asked IFA President Joe Healy about the issues facing the current generation of farmer representatives.
There's a sense of history about today, Patrick. And those people laid the foundations for what we know IFA down through in my lifetime, and what it's today. And oftentimes during the summer, it being the year that was in it in the 50th anniversary, and we'd send an email or a request to meet a minister, and straight away they'd be back. And all the ministers that are associated with rural Ireland, or that we thought there was any benefit of meeting in the lead up to the budget, they all agreed to meet us. And it was all based on the foundation stones that were laid by the great men and women that's behind us in this big hall here this evening. And I think there's an element of camaraderie, an element of team spirit, an element. It's amazing the number of heroes, I call them, that I've spoken to today from all over the country. And the one thing that they're delighted out of is that IFA is here to organise an event like this and to lobby for the issues that we got in the budget. And that's their one wish, that IFA remains the strong, powerful lobby group. And that's the general. I could say everyone that I've spoken to, that's their wish for the organisation.
And it's no secret, we're in a tough time. There's very little daylight in a lot of sectors, and I suppose the spirit of what these people have done, I suppose, is living on through you now, and through the people that you're leading.
Yeah, and it's funny you should say that. I met one man from Meath here today, and he more or less said exactly what you were saying. But he said, Joe, remember, ye have far better ways, methods and technology of fighting those tough times, he said, than the even tougher times that was in Ireland through the 50s, through the 60s, into the 70s. And maybe he wanted to give me hope or something, but, it's very true. We are in tough times. You were in Leitrim the other night yourself at the ANC meeting, which is going up for review this next year, the new year. Crucial issue for many sections throughout rural Ireland, but in particular that particular area that we were in, the heartland of people that are dependent on the ANC payments. And look, I saw this year, come September, and I'm not saying anything here that's not known, but like farmers had their hands out for that ANC money. It had been such a tough year, almost every commodity selling under the cost of production. The weather in the springtime and a lot of the weather during the summer as well, and especially into September, and I'm thinking of the grain lads in particular. There was no income coming in, and as one farmer said to me, the ANC money, he said, is the one money that we get that we don't have to pay planners or we don't have to pay vets.
You take a box and you get it.
Yeah, exactly. You get it. So that is a crucial issue going forward. But a good crowd in Leitrim, and I think it was important to kick it off there. And look, that's only the start of the battle. There's a big battle ahead on it.
And exactly, that's what I would describe as well, a battle. We're going to see some maps next spring, which will, with the political, as Mairead McGuinness said on Friday, that's where the political fight will really begin. What is the line in the sand for you? Where cannot allow the government and Europe to reach beyond? Where will you say stop?
Well, we have to maintain the pot of money that's coming into the country, and we have to get it back to pre-2008 levels. Farmers were the first people to take a cut in the downturn, and it's terrible that 8-9 years later That, you hear people talking about the recovery, and that amount of money that was taken from, and you're talking about the most vulnerable of farmers. When you're talking about people getting money through the ANC, that has to be restored. There was an announcement earlier on in the year of half it being restored. We want the whole amount restored, and we want to ensure that the people that are working on the margins in vulnerable areas, and like as I said in Leitrim, when you heard me saying it, Patrick, that there are good land and bad land in every county in the country. What varies is the percentages of each. So, we want to ensure that the farmers get fair play, and that the pot of money is at the very least retained. And when I say retained, I mean at pre-2008 levels. And any increase we can get on that be a bonus.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
One of the participants in the commemoration was Adrian Leddy from Leitrim, whose father took part in the march. He told me about this piece of family history.
My father is Hugh Leddy, who walked to Dublin from Carrigan-Shannon along with the Sligo people. He was chairman of Leitrim IFA at the time, and he linked up with Sligo, who Joe Dunphy was the leader of Sligo and chairman, and they were two of the people, of the 9 people that were chosen to sit on the steps in Dublin.
And you painted a wonderfully vivid picture of your father heading off on a cold October's morning, you as a 15-year-old young lad, and your mother, who was pregnant at the time. What was the impact, and how did you view, from a personal point of view, how did you view your father heading off to do that?
Well, I suppose there was, a lot of meetings in our local kitchen at home, working out the plans. And the other situation, that when he headed off on the march, one had to man up, and that was milking cows, and I had to milk his share of cows and that there at home, and it was milking by hand. And that was the way, and arranging the work. But we really appreciated the help and support of neighbours. And I can tell you today that the work was never done as quickly at home. The harvest, all the work with what they call the metal came in, and the thrashing machine and all. And God, when he came home, he couldn't believe the amount of work and the way it was done.
How long was he away for?
He was away, like, if you take it that he was 21 days on the steps, and then the 5 or 6 days that he was walking, you could take it that he was nearly away for the 30 days away from home, a full month. And again, nothing went astray. It was a lot of pressure on probably my mother at the time, and then he was probably the only person that did the tree, that he walked to Dublin, that he done the blockade on Ruski Bridge, that ended up with them being lifted to go to jail. And that was a tough day at home. I remember the tears from my mother when the guards arrived to take him away to bring him to Mountjoy for blocking the bridge. And, that was what I was referring today, the sacrifices that these people made for the good of all farmers in Ireland, and to set down the barometer for people to follow. And my God, everybody looks back to the people of 1966 and 67 of the Farmers' Rights Campaign. They made it NFA and what IFA is today.
And finally, the legacy of your father lives on through you. You've been working, and you've given your life to IFA, working very hard for farmers over the last, X number of years. The legacy lives on very much through you and through the work, the farmers that you work with through the branches in Donegal, Leitrim and Sligo.
Yes, indeed. Between a short while in FBD and when they were collecting the share capital to set up FBD in 69 and 70, you could say that I'm nearly 46 years involved. And, as I say, it's in me blood. And I seen what my father did, and when the opportunity arose in Donegal, I definitely took it with both hands to work for IFA, and then I moved back down to regional office in Roscommon to look after Roscommon and Longford, Leitrim and Sligo. And I have enjoyed it immensely, and I enjoy working with farmers. And needless to say, there's ups and downs in farming, and we have to fight all the battles, and that's what the association is all about.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
And finally, my colleague Mary Phelan interviewed an experienced Christmas tree grower for this week's Irish Country Living. She tells Ciara Leahy all about the business, customer anecdotes and a surprise tip to keep your tree green through the holiday season.
I met Kate Byrne. She's based in Hackettstown in County Carlow, and she is a Christmas tree farmer. So it was my first time to meet a Christmas tree farmer, and I learned a lot of things from Kate. For example, Ciara, did you know that it takes 8 years to grow a Christmas tree?
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it takes a lot more work than I would have expected. You know, Kate spends the year, I mean, it's a full-time job really, starting in, you know, she sells the trees in December, but she's back out in January again, and there's a lot of pruning to be done. That's a very big job. They have to be bud picked. You have to take the buds off the top. In general, it's quite labour intensive, the work, and she made the point that, you know, it's not a matter of putting a plant in the ground and going back in 8 years' time and going, oh wow, I've got a Christmas tree. You know, there's a lot more to it than that. And she was discussing with me the pruning and how she does that in such a way to kind of enhance the shape of the tree, so they don't just grow in the shape that you would like them to grow in just of their own accord. You know, that takes a lot of input from her. But the other thing I thought was quite interesting is that the Irish climate is perfect for growing Christmas trees. So if the climate was too hot, they would get scorched or parched, and if they were too cold, especially if our climate was too cold and especially if it was too frosty, the ground would crack and the trees won't root. So the typical damp Irish climate is actually very conducive to the growing of Christmas trees.
That's really interesting. And when we were discussing this beforehand, you said there was different types of Christmas trees.
Yes, so Kate grows 3 different types of trees. She has the Noble Fir, the Norway and the Nordmania. And she says that the Noble would have always been popular because there's a lovely smell of it, while the Nordmania is a lovely new breed that has come in. It's kind of a lovely shaped tree. And then the old time tree is the Norway, and she says you'll be picking the pines up off the floor for years afterwards. Yeah. So she said people still love them, and if they've a timber floor especially, that makes it a bit more manageable, or they might keep them outside because they really do shed, but there's a beautiful smell of them.
Well, that's good to know, because I would probably be avoiding those ones.
I know you would, Ciara.
So she's been at this a while. Has the Christmas tree market changed in recent years?
Yeah, so she says that during the Celtic Tiger there was people buying 2 trees. They were buying one for the sitting room, they were getting a little one for the kitchen, and they were maybe even getting a tree for the child's bedroom. So, you know, we were a very extravagant nation at one point. And then she says, you know, when the Celtic Tiger ended and people didn't have the money, they still wanted the perfect tree, but they weren't willing to give you as much. So I guess one of the points she really made during the interview is that buying a tree is actually a hugely special moment for a couple. It's not just a case, as I thought, or maybe in my family, mum or dad goes off and gets it and that's it, and it's a bit of a job to get it up. It's a very kind of sentimental time, and you know, she mentions one particular person who actually it was a couple, but the guy got down on one knee and he proposed when they were buying the tree, and now they come back every year and he comes back with the 3 children. So
that's lovely.
It's very sweet. But then by the same token, she says it can be quite emotive and people leave not talking.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a lovely story, but myself and my husband, the situation's a little more different. We're usually in the corner fighting about which one to get and how much to spend, because it can be a bone of contention.
Yeah, it certainly can, and as I said, and as you have just confirmed as well, people do leave fighting. But you know, it is a very sentimental time, and she has been selling these trees in the Overflow car park near Slorgan Shopping Centre for years, and she's the same people coming back to her every year. So you know, there's a few anecdotes in the article in Country Living, and I'll leave them for the reader to kind of enjoy at their own leisure. But you know, she did mention one couple in particular who every year they get the tree and then they go and they stand the tree outside a local pub and put 2 Santy hats on it, and they have a drink in the pub and leave the tree with the hats outside, have their hot whiskey, and then carry the tree down across the dual carriageway. So, and she mentioned several anecdotes like that, which were very, very sweet.
That is really sweet. Just to ask you one more thing, just to go back to the Christmas tree market, did she say anything about, you know, over the years whether people are they still opting for the real trees, or has there been a lot of uptake of the artificial trees?
I did ask her, do plastic trees kind of have an impact on her business? And I was kind of expecting that the answer would be yes, that as time is going on, people are more interested in the plastic thing. But she actually said that people kind of change every year, that one year they might go for plastic, or they might go for a plastic tree for another number of years. And then one year they'll go, no, I feel like a real tree this year. So I kind of thought you were either a plastic tree person or a real tree person. But actually, that doesn't seem to be the case. You might have one for a few years and then decide to change. So, yeah, that was interesting as well.
Finally, as we said, people are going away there now. They're starting to buy their trees. What about minding your tree? Because you want this to last into the start of January. What can you do to really get the best out of your purchase?
So she said that if you have a water stand, put some Red Bull into it, because there is nourishment in Red Bull. Or she said put in plant food or watery sugar. Now, she had a problem with a water stand in that the water level was dropping drastically, and she knew that it wasn't because the tree was sapping it up, and it took her a while to realise that the dog was actually drinking all the water in the house. So if you have a house dog, watch out. But I think putting Red Bull in as well will deter the dog from drinking your Christmas tree water.
So a really interesting article on Christmas trees, looking at it from a different perspective in this week's Irish Country Living. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Ciara.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie, on the Irish Farmers Journal app and on iTunes every Thursday. Brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.